As we discussed last week, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the KORUS FTA. U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai said that the KORUS FTA is a manifestation of the resilience in the bilateral economic relationship between South Korea and the U.S. and the ability of the two nations to confront challenges head-on. So to find out more about this historic agreement, what it means to South Korea, we're very pleased and honored to be joined by Jong-hoon, who is the former Minister for Trade of South Korea. Hello.
Hello, Henry. Good morning.
Good morning to you,
I'm
sir.
very glad to talk with you.
Well, I'm very glad and honored that you have chosen to spend your precious time with us, Minister Kim. This is certainly a historic moment, the 10th anniversary of the KORUS FTA coming into force. I think a lot of our younger listeners may not remember, but there was a period of time when you were probably, aside from the president of the country, the most featured government official on television, both in international news and in domestic news, as well as you were constantly on the forefront as part of the delegation and then the head of the delegation for these negotiations. In your view, in assessing the legacy, what significance do you think the KORUS FTA has had on Korea?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for your very kind comment. Well, it is very good to say that the look back was good. Comparing with the 10 years ago, two-way trade volume and investment remarkably increased, and mutual market shares as well. So I think I can comfortably say that this agreement has brought us a kind of a win-win benefits. That is the foremost significance, I think.
In terms of the KORUS FTA and obviously the immense efforts and achievements you were able to do in facilitating this, what does the FTA mean to you personally?
Yeah, KORUS was the most meaningful work that I completed in my career, and it was the last one also, because I quitted the administration right after KORUS got through with our Korean National Assembly in November 2011. But anyway, in my 37 years of public servant or career diplomat, this job was the most meaningful and I may say most successful job or work I completed.
Back then, as we know, the public had expressed some concerns about opening the markets, particularly sensitive sectors like agriculture. There were some political obstacles as well. Some politicians vehemently opposed to this. How did you feel about those roadblocks at the time, and how did you manage to successfully pursue the conclusion of this agreement despite those hurdles?
Oh, yes, that's a very good question. Yes, there were concerns, and you're right. But at the same time, there were positive groups of people. Problem I felt at the time was supporting groups were very logical, but usually they were very calm, while opposing groups were very vociferous, and quite often they took their claims to the street in terms of manifestation and demonstration. Mm-hmm. Well, I spent hours and hours and day after day in media and National Assembly hearings for discussions, debates, quite often which turned into a kind of argument, It took us almost 5 years to get congressional agreement in both countries. Looking back on those days, I may count 3 things were very important. Number one was the top political leadership. Mm-hmm. What do you think in his mind, whether this is good for the nation? So that was his decision and his political will to carry it out. And number 2 was trade adjustment measures, which helped people vulnerable to foreign competition, as you have already mentioned, such as farmers or some, small and medium, entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So, as just the United States does, we adopted quite a great deal of measures of a trade adjustment. That was number 2. Mm-hmm. And number 3 was trust between negotiating teams across the Pacific. So that was very important because in any negotiations, there's a tactics and strategies. But in my memory, we have never made any kind of outright liar or kind of cheating. So that means we had a very solid trust. That was very good.
Yeah, and so ultimately, we had the deal in effect. Maybe both sides were not 100% satisfied with their terms of the deals in terms of this negotiation process. Nevertheless, it has borne fruit for South Korea. In your view, what are some of the big achievements that South Korea has benefited from, whether it be industries that have opened up for trade? What do you think about during the past decade, the KORUS FTA has borne fruit for South Korea?
Okay. Well, as you know, Korea is a manufacturing nation. So I think most of the manufactured goods, including automobile, of course, benefited. But no less important in my mind is this agreement, what we call KORUS, has brought us a kind of new mindset in our economy, which was open and compete and play by the rule. And that is kind of much more important, what can I say, a stream of ideas, among players in the market. So areas of industry benefited from the KORUS. Well, that has been proved by numbers and figures. But what you cannot prove by numbers and figures is the mindset or the spirit that this agreement has brought us, which I say again, open and compete and play by the rule.
We often think of the ROK-US alliance mostly in terms of the security alliance because of our unique situation, North Korea, and this tension that has inherently existed on the peninsula for well over 5-6 decades. But with trade, how, in your view, has the KORUS FTA actually helped the bilateral relationship between South Korea and the U.S., and how has it evolved in the past 10 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, bilateral relationship goes up and down depending on the nature of a political leadership, both in Washington and Seoul. Well, when I say about the relations between, Korea and United States. However, the strongest base for a good relationship is, I may say, ties between people, which is the ties between markets, thanks to the opening. And thanks to the opening, when the distance between two markets gets shortened, then that means the distance between people gets shortened too. And that would be the strongest base for a good relationship. So I do believe KORUS contributed to maintaining and strengthening alliance of our two countries by shortening the distance between people across the Pacific.
In terms of the negotiations, and as I mentioned, you were on our television screens, on our newspaper images for so many years in quite a prominent way, and you kind of struck a very stark figure. Most politicians, government officials are very vain, and they always want to dye their hair, but you came out and you had the charismatic image, and you were given a nickname, Gladiator, during the negotiations. As a gladiator of negotiations, it's a give and take, right? It's not just always about a zero-sum, I got to win as much as I can on my side. What do you think are the most important elements in negotiations, especially when you had such very polarized aspects of this agreement in terms of the South Korean interests and the U.S. interests in this FTA lead-up?
Well, Henry, I think I need to clarify here first. About what people call me a gladiator. Well, one day after a very hard and long days of negotiations, in our one-on-one private conversation, I talked to my counterpart, then Wen Coupler. What I said was, we must have been gladiators in our previous lives. Mm-hmm. That's why we have such a toils and pains, mm-hmm. in arguing each other. But what I continue to say was, but in these negotiations, we never have one of us die. So let us stay alive, both mm-hmm. of us, and show to the people with a win-win kind of outcome. that was the conversation, I shared with Wendy at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But people just pick up, gladiator
Right.
only, without any, further conversation I had with Wendy. So here, right, I said gladiator, but what I meant was not to die, but to survive, both of us. But most important element in negotiations, well, I may say, as I told you, trust among counterparts. That is very important because there's zig and zags and ups and downs, strategies and tactics, many many bumpy or choppy waves in the course of negotiations. Well, unless you have a trust, then such kind of hurdles, and barriers cannot easily be overcome. So I was very fortunate, between me and Wendy, and between many levels of counterparts of Koreans and American negotiators, we had a very solid trust each other. So that's in my memories. As I told you, I have no memories of making a lie or cheating, to make my own case a kind of success.
Right.
That was not the strategies or tactics we adopted. We try to be honest, and we try to be logic and reason.
And you mentioned those bumps along the way, but yet as two gladiators who survived this all through and came to an amicable agreement, there have been still some bumps subsequently. Since the former U.S. President Barack Obama took office in 2009, the U.S. has called for some kind of renegotiation of certain aspects of the KORUS FTA. This culminated in the very anti-trade stance of the former President Donald Trump, and eventually South Korea did succumb and agree to renegotiate. What do you think the main reasons were for the South Korean government to renegotiate those deals with the Trump administration?
You said Trump administration? Well, at that time, I was out of government, so that renegotiation was done by someone else. So I cannot say much in details. But if you say the first renegotiation during the times of President Obama, as you know, President Obama took office January 2009, and renegotiation took place toward the end of November the next year. So the next year, 2010. So during those 2 years, that 2 years were really full of incessant agony for me, because I continued saying to my own people here in Korea that I cannot even change one dot or one comma. But there was a continuing demand from Washington to renegotiate. I did know, to rewrite particular automobile chapter of the agreement was one of the electoral campaign commitment of President Obama. And at that time, 3 major American car makers, or 3 of them, were in a very difficult financial situation due to financial crisis of Wall Street in 2008. So, at the end of a 2-year-long stalemate, finally my government came to a decision to renegotiate, because we did believe at the time renegotiations could lead us to enter into force of that agreement. If not, the agreement could not have a life. That means could not, take effect.
Right.
But the later case, which certainly be much more expensive for Korean economy and maybe for U.S. economy too. So that's why I said again with the American negotiators to rewrite a certain part of the agreement, and there was a kind of give and take. And I brought back the result to the people with an explanation that I made a concession on this part, and United States made a certain concession on other parts. So this is a kind of give and take. No one can say, numerically whether this is well balanced or not, but there was anyhow give and take. And, well, that was the end of the story of a renegotiation. So that paved the way for the congressional approval.
Right, and as a leader, sometimes those difficult decisions do have to be made. We are in the year 2022 now, Minister Kim, and it's a very different global landscape. How do you think we should build on the KORUS FTA with the various emerging markets and obviously this very different global situation we find post-pandemic and right now in the midst of a potentially global conflict?
Mm-hmm. Yes, after KORUS, Korea concluded another few FTA with trading partners, including emerging markets. So we have a very wide and solid network of FTAs, and such network is now rendering Korean economy and Korean traders evidently good infrastructures, even in today's changing global situations. About global situations, well, there are certain changes during the time I worked in the government, and that was almost 10 years ago, or more than that. Now, if you look around the world, no country or no leader of a country has come up with a kind of claim that we need a further liberalization or further market opening. Mm. It is very hard to find any such leader these days.
Yeah.
But in any case, those FTA network we have already made can play a very important role as a good infrastructure for Korean traders.
Another, a former U.S. official, Cleet Willems, who was part of this KORUS FTA negotiation, he says South Korea and the U.S. should both consider joining the group known as, right now, the CPTPP. Formerly was a conglomerate of nations forming the TPP. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I personally support free trade, and I can easily or comfortably get along with any kind of regional agreements aiming at opening and liberalization. I may be wrong, but as far as I sense, Biden administration proclaimed trade policy for worker, quote and unquote, or work-centric trade policy. Well, frankly, I think such a stance has a certain distance from regional trade agreement aiming at further liberalization, like CPTPP, TPP.
Right. Right.
So, well, again, there's a certain distance, and that's why people now hardly say about further liberalization or further market opening. Whereas for Korea, many of us have concerns for Japan because Japan is a party member of CPTPP. And as you know, well, with Japan, we have a chronic trade deficit since 40, 50 years ago. And besides that, mutual negative sentiment surrounding issues of past history are certainly a big hurdle. So, to do anything, in terms of a trade arrangement or, in a form of agreement or two countries, I mean Korea and Japan, needed to improve overall relationship first of all to favor ways forward. Well, we are now expecting a new Korean administration to begin sailing very soon. So, and we had a new prime minister, since last year in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. So that may be a good momentum to sit together, and to discuss about how to improve overall relationship.
Yeah, and that will actually lead us to our final question. We are almost out of time, so we should skip to our final question, Minister Kim. Economic security is one of the so-called big issues in today's politics. This new Yoon Suk-yeol administration incoming, what policy direction do you think they should adopt for trade?
Oh yes, well, as I told you, there's some changes in world trade order. Number one, WTO is now idling, and rule-based multilateralism is quite waning. So, and instead the people, began talking about kind of closer cooperation and conversation among like-minded countries. Well, in that sense, I think Korea should have a more conversation and connection with the like-minded countries, respond to new emerging issues such as security and supply chains, which we witnessed already certain sporadic ruptures, in the chains due to certain, controversies between United States and China, particularly, and about the digital economy, which is again very important. But in KORUS at that time, 10 years ago, we couldn't handle about that, with a series, with much in details. So digital economy is a good area to work together, or cooperate with the like-minded countries. And how about, climate change or, to respond to pandemics? So these are new emerging issues. So we need a more close cooperation and conversation with the like-minded countries, I think.
Minister Kim, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for spending, again, the time out of your busy schedule to give us sort of this commemoration of the 10th year anniversary of the KORUS FTA. We believe that we hope to see you in good health and in good standing, that hopefully we can see each other in the studio one day, if time permits, out of your busy schedule, and we can speak again. Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck to you, sir.
Henry, thank you very much. It is very good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was our special guest, the former Minister for Trade of South Korea, Kim Jong-hoon, giving us his thoughts in his very crucial role in the passage and the implementation of the KORUS FTA on its 10-year anniversary. Stay tuned. You are listening to This Morning.